Hello and welcome to Continental's tutorial video online course of how to install our tire pressure monitoring system, the ContiPressureCheck. I'm Tom Fanning. Trey Thompson and I will be working together to show you how simple and quick it is to install the ContiPressureCheck system on a typical Class 8 truck in a shop setting. Here we have the complete ContiPressureCheck system and the 4 additional sensors to complete an install on a 10-tire Class 8 vehicle. We'll now lay these pieces out and go through them individually so that you understand the parts required for the kit and the individual installation steps. So when you open the kit, what you'll find in the box are the following contents. You have the instruction manual and DVD, the 6 sensors and the additional sensors for the tire pressure monitoring system, as well as the squeegee and glue for their application. This is the main wiring harness for the system. You can see the wires where we route through the cab to pick up additional connections, as well as the central control unit, the brain for the system of Conti's tire pressure monitoring system, ContiPressureCheck. This is the configurable mounting bracket for the CCU, and the hardware where we'll show bolting to the frame for the CCU placement. Here's the main power supply for the system, as well as the electrical connections to pick up the 12 volts, the wiring harness for the display unit itself, as well as the display unit, which shows tire pressure and temperature on the in-cab display, and a windshield mounting kit for that. Here we have the additional wiring harness for the auxiliary antenna, which is important in longer wheelbase applications for the mounting harness, the hardware, the antenna, and protective enclosure, or if we want to mount the system to pick up expandability for tire pressure monitoring in trailer applications. Now that we've covered the individual components of the kit, we wanted to make sure you had the 4 supplies in addition to general mechanics tools that are required to complete the install. The first 2 of those products available from any tire maintenance store or tire repair shop are liquid pre-buff as well as an interliner scraper. The next 2 tools you need available from Continental are the tire sensor cup mounting tool and the programming device that will be used at the end to program the individual tire sensors to the system to marry the unit. Okay, now that you see all the individual components of the kit, we'll run you through the installation steps. The first thing we're going to concentrate on are the installation of the tire pressure sensors in the individual tires as step 1. Then we'll move to the mounting of the bracket for the central control unit, how the central control unit is attached, and then how that wiring harness is run.
The next step will be the installation of the auxiliary antenna and wiring harness, including the provided bracket.
And then finally, we'll move into the cab where you'll see the tap for the 12-volt power for the unit, the wiring of the display, and the mounting of the display within the cab. So as the first part of the installation process, we've brought our technician in who's going to jack the truck up and remove the tires so that we can mount the sensors in the individual wheel positions. Of course, always, we want to make sure that we're doing everything safely. We've got our safety glasses, we've got our gloves, our technician has made sure that the tires on the vehicle are chalked and that we're using proper lifting techniques as well as jack stands during this part of the process.
Now we're going to begin the tire sensor installation portion of the process. To make things a little easier, we're going to locate the balancing dot on the tire, and we'll place our sensor near that dot so that later on in the process it'll be easier to determine where the sensor is. In order to give myself a little more room, I'm going to put a tire spreader in. Now we're ready to begin preparing the inner liner for the adhesion process. Now that we have the tire in position, we're going to mark off an area to be cleaned for the sensor installation. I'm now going to use my liquid buffer and scraper to prepare the inner liner for the sensor. You want to make sure that you scrape using adequate pressure. Clean your scraper after each pass. We're going to repeat this step at least 3 times to ensure that we have proper surface preparation. Now that I've finished scraping the liner, I'm going to wipe the area off. First apply more liquid buffer, and then wipe making sure to use only the clean portion of my rag and go in one direction as to not contaminate the clean surface. Now we can prepare the sensor itself. The next part in the process is to make sure we thoroughly clean the back of the sensor itself. This is a critical part in the process to ensure adequate adhesion in the tire. So again, I'm going to use my liquid buffer. I'm going to put some on the back of the sensor, and then I'm going to wipe in one direction, making sure I only use clean portion of my rag. Now that the sensor is clean, I'm going to activate the sensor using the handheld tool. The sensor is shipped in a deactivated state in order to preserve battery life. So next we will activate the sensor. We're going to do this with our handheld programming tool. We select tire sensor, activate sensor, and hold the sensor close to the tool. We receive our signal that the sensor was successfully activated. And now we also receive some data about this particular sensor. The sensor ID, the pressure reading, current pressure reading, and temperature are also shown on this screen. Now we'll repeat this step for all tires in the process. For this step in the process, we're going to use the Cyberbond glue that was included in your kit. We'll remove the glue from the package. Next, we'll take the sensor that we just activated and cleaned, and we'll place it into the pressing tool. Now that the sensor is in the pressing tool, we'll apply the glue. Next, we want to look at the arrows on the pressing tool and make sure that these are going in the direction of rotation on the tire. We'll find the area that we marked and cleaned, press the tool onto the inner liner of the tire, and hold for 45 seconds. Okay, now we're going to gently remove the tool from the sensor. We're going to take the squeegee that was also supplied in the kit. We're going to go around the outside of the sensor, making sure that we remove any excess glue. Now we're ready to mount the tire on the wheel.
The next step in the installation process is the mounting of the bracket that'll hold the CCU in place. Trey's already been down here taking a look at the frame. What do you think, Trey?
Well, we want to choose a location that's near the back of the cab, just below the frame rail, but not too low that it could easily be damaged.
If we came in on these 4 studs ahead of this brace and mounted there, what do you think about that?
I think that'll be a good location. We want to avoid airlines and other obstructions. We have the opportunity here to use some existing bolt holes so we don't have to drill into the frame.
Okay, so then if we just took this 4-bolt pattern, transferred it to our brace, and drilled the mounting bracket, we could mount here and be good to go.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, Trey, I think it's time to move on to the mounting of the additional receiver assembly. Now, what is the purpose of this assembly?
The additional receiver is important for long wheelbase applications and for future expandability for trailer use.
Okay, so if we just pop the additional receiver into the mounting bracket, we slide it down until it locks in place. Now, we have to find a vibration-proof or resistant area closest to the back of the wheelbase of the truck. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've gone ahead and drilled some holes in this piece of angle iron and bolted it to the bottom of this cross member.
Okay, so if we were to affix this here, then we should have good reception from the antenna to the back to pick up the trailer tires and the sensors in the trailers, and also additional reception from the drive wheel position.
That's correct.
Okay. Now we just take the supplied wiring harness, and we're going to route this from that bracket assembly along the frame and back up to the bracket that the CCU is affixed to.
Yeah, if you'll notice on this wiring harness, it actually has a double end on this end. This goes in series with the CCU and the cable that runs into the cab.
Okay, and I see here from the length of this harness that we have plenty of room to work with on longer wheelbase vehicles such as Class 6 or 7 vans and conversions.
Box trucks, yeah.
Okay, great. Let's get to work. Now that we have the auxiliary receiver mounted on a rigid portion of the frame, we've brought the wiring harness back from the CCU plate and plugged it into the auxiliary receiver. It's important to tie everything in place with the zip ties and make sure everything's vibration proof. All right, we've got that attached. What about the routing of the wiring harness, Trey?
Tom, the important thing here was that we stayed along the inside of the frame rail. We ran it along these existing wiring harnesses. That way we know there's a good chance that it's not going to be caught up in the drive shaft or any road debris.
Okay, and so we can start zip tying from this end, and that brings all the additional extra harness in the length up by the CCU bracket, and we can tie it up out of the way.
Yeah, let's clean this up, make it look good.
Okay, great. Trey's working on tightening up the bracket for the CCU unit. How's that coming with the wiring harness, Trey?
Well, Tom, we've got the bracket good and tight. Now we're going to connect up our wiring harnesses. We've got the wiring harness from the auxiliary antenna that's got our male and female end here that's going to go in series. We've got the wiring harness that we ran under the cab and then up through the firewall that's going to connect to the display. So first, we'll connect the wiring harness to the cab, to the wiring harness to the auxiliary connector. Then we're going to connect this into the CCU. Now we'll take our excess wire, we'll put it up out of the way and make sure that it doesn't get caught up in anything.
Okay, we've completed the routing of the wiring harness from the CCU and the mounting assembly up through the frame, away from any moving parts or heat sources. We found an existing grommet in the firewall, and we've brought the 4 wires in that require the connection to the rest of the assembly to complete the install through the cab and routed them up over the cab. Now Trey's going to get in, find us a 12-volt switched ignition source so that we can complete the power and energize the wiring.
Okay, now we've located our 12-volt switch source. We're going to make up the connections on the rest of the cable, and it comes supplied with this round eyelet on the end of the hot source. Because of where we've chosen to connect to, we're going to cut this off and replace it with a spade connector. All right, so we've replaced the eyelet connector with a spade connector. We've connected our ground to a ground source, and now we're going to plug this into our 12-volt switched. Next, we'll make up the remaining connectors that supply power to the display and the CCU. So now I've completed making up my connectors on my wiring harness coming from the CCU, as well as the wiring harness coming from the display. Now I'm simply going to connect my brown and white communication wires to each other, as well as my red and black power wires for the power to the CCU and the power to the display. Next, Tom is going to configure the system and teach in the tire positions.
So Trey showed us how we hook up the electrical connections in the cab. We're positioning the display unit. The last step and most important step of the process is using the CPC handheld to learn the sensors in each one of the tires. Trey then is going to show us how that's downloaded from the handheld into the system to completely activate it. But we wanted to walk through the steps of how the handheld works. So if we start with the power up of the handheld, we're going to installation. This is a new installation. We're going to call this, it's going to ask for a vehicle number, but just for simplicity's sake, we'll call this truck number T5. So it is a truck and bus. You can see you can program trailer or married units. This is a truck and bus. We do have the additional receiver unit antenna system in the back, so we say yes. 3 axles on this vehicle as well, that is correct. And then we go through different vehicle configurations here. This is a typical Class 8 configuration, 8 drive tires and 2 steers, as opposed to 2 and 2. So we're going to select the correct wheel configuration. And then now we need to set the values for nominal pressure. On this truck, we're going to select 118 PSI for the front because those are 16-ply steer tires, and then no lift axle position on this vehicle. Now on the drive axle, we go here, those are set. Now it's time for the individual tire sensors to be taught into the handheld unit. So we press the go button, and we're going to start, as you can see, requested the left rear outside. So we start with the sensor unit with the handheld, moving it around the tire. So all we do, we've now learned the left rear outside tire sensor. The next position is the left front outside, and we'll continue that till we record all 10 of the tire positions for the sensors, and they're learned into the handheld.
Now that Tom has completed teaching in each wheel position, we're going to download the data from our handheld unit into the central control unit. We've chosen a position for our display, and we've plugged in our wiring harness to the back of the display. Next, we're going to connect the handheld unit to the display through this diagnostic cable. So first, I'll plug this into my handheld unit. I'm going to spin this around so that I can see a little bit better. Plug that in. Now I'm going to turn the ignition on. The first message that I get is system not configured, which is what we would expect. So next, I'm going to transfer the data from here into the system. Now the upload is in process. Got the message that my upload was successfully completed. As you can see, I now have a bird's eye view of my wheel configuration for this vehicle, and it's starting to populate. Now that each tire position is represented on our screen, we have the option to switch from bar to PSI and set our temperature to Celsius or Fahrenheit, whichever our preference. To make that change, we're going to hit the set button. We're going to scroll down to the bar Celsius. We hit OK, and as you can see, it switches to PSI and Fahrenheit. If that's what we want, we hit set to keep that setting, and now you can see the tire pressure represented in PSI. If I want to view the temperature for each tire position, I simply hit this button and I toggle from pressure to temperature. To get back to pressure, hit this button again. All right, that completes another successful installation. Now we're just going to head out for our test drive.
We hope our tutorial that we've provided today has shown you how simple and easy it is to install a ContiPressureCheck system in a typical Class 8 truck. If you have additional questions or need more information, please refer to www.ContiPressureCheck.com. Thanks, we appreciate your business.